Hey guys, welcome back. Well, I thought I'd share with you a few of the changes I've been making to the mount and to my SCT imaging system based on some image analysis I had been doing, and put a video up about a month and a half ago. I thought I'd go over these changes with you and show you some of the motivation behind each of the changes and some of the effects, and you may want to do some of these things yourself. So let's get started. One of the first things I did was switch out the original saddle that came with the Skywatcher EQ6-R mount. The original saddle has a bit of a, I would call it a manufacturing defect that allows the scope to rotate when you unclamp the saddle, and that's okay if it's a smaller refractor with a handle and you've got a good grip on it. But when it's a ungainly SCT without a handle, it's a little disconcerting to have the scope rotate on you all of a sudden as you're loosening the clamp to let it to take the scope out of the saddle. And so I went ahead and did what many of you have done, which is to replace that saddle with the ADM accessories version, very precisely machined saddle. And I'll show you a video of what that looks like here in a little bit, but it's a well-made saddle at $200. I couldn't go to a local machine shop with these plans and have this made for 3 times the cost. So I felt like with the cost of this saddle and the benefits that it provides, it's a pretty decent investment. So I did that. Second thing I did, I watched a video from Explore, Learn, Share. He did a great job showing a couple of very simple mods you can make to the Skywatcher mount. One of them, you go ahead and loosen off this nut here at the base of the deck axis, and that will free up the deck axis to move a bit. You don't want to introduce any free play, but you can certainly improve the freeness with which that axis moves. And you can do the same thing in the RA axis when you remove the back white cover, the polar scope, and a little silver retaining ring that goes around there for the to hold the cap on. But once you get back down to this smooth circular nut here, if you can finally get it done, and it took me 3 or 4 tries to finally get this off and back the nut off just a tad. Now I had to use channel lock pliers. I tried the strap wrench, but I had to eventually came to the point where it was it or me, and I used the channel lock pliers and finally got it done. Now the RA axis swings quite freely as well. Let's go over to a video and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here's the mount set up indoors. The ADM saddle, you can see, is just sits there in replacement of the original saddle, and it was when you squeeze in the clamping motion of the original saddle, which you can't really see here, but that moving side raises up as it's moving in and goes down as it's moving out, and as a result the scope rotates in the process, whereas the ADM saddle is very precisely machined, almost to the point where these edges here, the dovetail, are actually quite sharp to the feel. I mean, this is a very precisely machined piece of equipment, and when you tighten in with these larger handles, you don't have any of that up-down motion that the other saddle or original saddle gave you. Now on the deck and RA axis, you just adjust the 3 set screws that hold that in, and you can back that off probably with a strap wrench, and it works fine. It's fairly easy to get that one loose. The back end's a different matter. When you take off the white cap and the polar scope, you get back down to that black nut. You ultimately have to use a pretty good amount of torque to get that thing loose. But once you do, now the deck axis moves very freely, and the ADM saddle is a bit heavy, so it does tend to lean one direction. But mostly I'm really impressed with the RA axis. It used to be I could put the RA axis in any orientation and it would stay there, and now it moves quite freely. And in fact, I did go back and tighten up that nut a little bit just so I didn't run the risk of introducing free play. But as it stands right now, these adjustments look awesome, and I can show you the effect of what happens with the deck axis. I did a Backlash assessment of the Skywatcher EQ6 right out of the box, and this is the result that I got that first night. Now I've shown this in a couple of videos, but what you're seeing is that the backlash result as its backlash behavior of the mount, as it's moving back, it's encountering some resistance in deck, and it takes a while for the commands to overcome that resistance, and then it finally catches up to where it's supposed to be. This is not what the deck graph is supposed to look like. Now, after making the modifications that we just looked at and that you'll see in that video from Explore, Learn, Share, once you back off the compression that this nut is having on the bearings, I got something that looks like this, which is much more in line with what we hope to see. A nice, straight, consistent line of motion up, and then another nice, consistent line moving down, and it's almost perfectly, was essentially no backlash for this mount. And I credit the adjustment of loosening off the compression that this nut places on the bearings as providing that transition from this behavior here over to this behavior, and why it is Skywatcher doesn't have some sort of a torque requirement when they're putting on this nut and the one in the back is beyond me, because that would solve a lot of problems that I think people experience with the mount right out of the box, is that these things are just on way too tight, particularly that RA nut. Great video to go look at, and a great adjustment to make, so be sure and check that out. Now let's talk about the SCT imaging train modifications that I made. Why am I doing this? Well, this goes back to a video I did about a month and a half ago in which I discuss Dawes limit and Nyquist limit. I'm not going to go through the definition of those things. You can go back and watch that video. The point is, I went back through all 4 scopes that I have and looked at the actual performance, not what optically it's supposed to do if you were sitting on top of a mountain with no seeing effects, but what am I getting down here near sea level with seeing effects. And in particular, I noticed that with my C925, I should be getting a full width at half maximum, if I'm at the top of a mountain with no seeing effects, of about 0.5 arc seconds. In other words, a very good resolution for this scope. But what I'm actually getting is 2.2 arc seconds on the best of times for my C925, and so I'm not nearly getting the theoretical performance out of the mount, which means that the pixel scale that I had been using, which is 0.34 arc seconds per pixel for my C925 at its full focal length and bend 1 on the ASI 1600 that I'm using, provides way more pixels than is necessary for the resolution that I'm actually able to get out of the mount. And so if I make the adjustment by saying, well, I've got the actual performance, the actual full width at half maximum is here, that means for the Nyquist limit corresponding to that actual performance, I need to have a pixel scale on the order of about 1.1 arc seconds per pixel. And that way I can see the resolution that this limit, that this full width at half maximum is giving me, but I get some additional benefits by stepping my pixel scale up to 1.14 arc seconds per pixel instead of the 0.34 arc seconds per pixel that I currently have. And the best way to do that is to bring in the focal reducer, which theoretically takes the focal ratio from f10 to f6.3, and start binning my ASI 1600 at 2x2 instead of the 1x1 that I'm using, and that will actually bring me up to 1.14 arc seconds per pixel. So I'm not doing what ultimately I would like to do, which is to move this yellow line down toward the green line, but at least I'm making some modifications that make the system easier to work with. For example, a focal reducer will give me more light coming into the scope. I will have a wider field of view. It will be somewhat easier to find a guide star with the wider field of view through my off-axis guider. And with the bin 2x2, I'm getting the added benefit of averaging 4 pixels, which gives me tonal gradations that are more subtle than what I get out of a bin 1x1. So I will have better tonal resolution, but because I'm still operating at 1/2 of the Dawes limit here, I'm not losing anything with respect to spatial resolution. And of course, with the bin 2x2, my photographs that I'm downloading, each sub is about 1/4 the size of what it was before, so now they're 8 megabytes instead of 32 megabytes, and so that is an improvement in processing and data handling as well. So this is the main thrust behind making these modifications here. And what the heck, might as well use an increased pixel scale, since I'm certainly not making use of the pixels that I'm currently using, and get some benefits out of it. Here is the Celestron focal reducer. I don't have the Edge HD version. There's a different focal reducer for that, for the higher quality scopes. I have the low rent version of the SCT, so I've got a standard 925 SCT, and here is the focal reducer, the 0.63 focal reducer that's appropriate for that scope. This edge here screws onto the back cell of the mount, and then the back threads back here is where your imaging train goes. And from there, you need 105 millimeters of back focus to match up to make the optics work out appropriately for this particular focal reducer. And with my imaging train, I've got the ASI 1600, a filter wheel, some spacers, and then there's 3 parts to the off-axis guider, Celestron off-axis guider. And when you stack all the parts up and measure them, as I did with a micrometer, I came up with these numbers. No point in reading those off. Now, the one thing I want to point out here, I do have Antlia filters that I'm replacing in my filter wheel, and they are 2 millimeters thick. I have it shown here as yellow and with a negative sign. What you want to do, and I have another video up with the Hotech Flattener that you can go look at for a little more discussion of this, but what you want to do is take the actual back focus is going to be the 105 that they say here plus the thickness of a filter divided by 3. And so I'm taking that plus filter thickness divided by 3 and moving it over to the other side of the equation, and that's why there's a negative here. So now when I add up all these numbers, I come up with 104.9 as my back focus, and that's certainly close enough for the kind of work that we're doing here. So I'm happy with the back focus, and so I expect to get the proper effect out of this reducer in terms of the reduced focal length and avoiding image aberrations around the corners and edges of the photographs. Now, one of the things that you have to remember, now that I'm replacing these spacers in between here, that also changes the focus of my off-axis guider. So one of the things that I did when I went out to do some test images, figure out what the proper exposures are now, find focus, etc., I also have to refocus the off-axis guider because of this change in the spacing that I made here. Now, here's one of the pictures I took with this altered configuration. One of the things that I have to do, again, because I'm using an off-axis guider, the focal length of the main scope is the focal length of my guide scope. And so I ran this image, and you can see we have M82 here, ran this image through the All-Sky plate solver, and it gives me the important information about this image, which is that the focal length is actually 1367 millimeters. I have a pixel scale, as I was pointing out earlier, about 1.14 arc seconds per pixel. And this says pixels per arc second, but it's arc seconds per pixel. And I have a pixel size of 7.6 microns, but of course this is in bin 2x2, so it's 2 times the native 3.8 microns for this camera. That's why I get 7.6 here. But the thing that struck me is that this focal length that it came up with is 1367 when I expect this to be 1480, based on the fact that I have a 2350 focal length for the scope times 0.63 for the focal reducer, should give me a focal length of 1480. So I went ahead and forwarded off an email to Celestron, and they responded back pretty quickly with a very interesting and thorough answer to my question. Just summarizing some of the main points from their response is that this focal reducer was designed a long time ago for film photography on the C8. The C925 didn't exist at that time, and so they had a lot looser requirements when they were doing the optical design aimed directed towards optical or film photography than we would expect to see with digital photography. And so the 0.63 is kind of a loosey-goosey number. Though it might be more appropriate for the C8, it's not for the C9. And one of the things he points out here is that the reducer effect does differ from scope to scope because of these design choices made way back when they designed this particular reducer. But in the end, I have a focal length of 1367 millimeters, which means I've got a focal ratio now. Instead of f10, I've got it around f5.8, which is actually pretty respectable. My ED102 700 millimeter scope has a focal ratio of 6.9. My smaller William Optics scopes are down near f5. So here's another change that I made based on some videos I saw from Joe's Astrophoto and Astrobloke. I put the links to their videos in the description as well. The Antlia filters are priced somewhere between kind of your entry-level filters like I have been using, which are the ZWO second-generation filters, and some of the much more expensive filters such as Astrodon. So these are midway priced and have, according to Joe and Glenn on their respective websites, they like these filters quite a bit. So I went ahead and bought a set with the hopes of eliminating some of those halos that I get particularly with the oxygen filter and the ZWO oxygen filter. So I'm hoping this is going to provide some additional imaging benefits. They come in a very nice case. The filters are wrapped in this, or sealed in this envelope. They are placed in this plastic case with a foam cushion above it, and then this lid, these 4 dots here, are magnets that clap onto the 4 magnets here, and it provides a nice little seal. Plus, once you install the filters and you've got these boxes lying around, these are actually very useful because we've got tons of little screws that we've got to deal with, and just having a nice clear small volume box that you can put in 10, 15, 30, whatever screws you have into this box and see what's in there is actually kind of beneficial. So these are nice little packaging that actually has some utility. Even once you get the filters into the filter wheel, these boxes are really useful. Now, I opted for the unmounted filters, and here you can see that I've installed them all in the filter wheel. In addition, I've installed the ZWO-03 filter in this empty 8th slot so that I can take some pictures and compare the kind of behavior I've been getting out of my ZWO filter with the performance of the Antlia Oxygen 3 filter. I'm really curious to see how much star halo reduction I'm getting out of these new filters. Now, when you install these filters like this, you need to be really careful. It is very challenging sometimes to get these little screws lined up on the hole just right and not have your screwdriver slip off and touch the filter. That happened a couple of times with me, and there were a corresponding barrage of cuss words that came after that. So if you take this approach, be very careful. Don't drink coffee before you do this, and just take your time, and everything will work out fine. Another thing I like about the Antlia filters, with each filter there is a data sheet. Now, this is the one that happens to come with the H-Alpha 3nm Pro filter, but it comes with a data sheet, and it says something very interesting down here. It says that each piece of the product passes through the high-quality spectrometer and gets complete and correct data, and that data's provided directly to the Antlia user. I hope that is true. I remember a video that Queeve did, and he passed some other filters through a spectrometer independently. He had access to a spectrometer, or to people who had a spectrometer, and they found there was quite a bit of variability to the point that it basically rendered that filter useless. And that's a pretty scary proposition because filters are not cheap, as you well know. And so having the quality control that tests your particular filter and gives you the data for your particular filter is a great thing, if that's in fact what that means. Now, on the other side of this sheet, you turn it over, and I think this is what they're telling us here. This is presumably the measured bandwidth of the hydrogen alpha filter. And if you look up here, there's a date and time stamp. November 27th, 2021, 11:24, 55 seconds. This would appear to be the timestamp in which this test was performed. Now, one of the interesting things is, for those of you out there who have this H-Alpha filter, the 3nm Pro H-Alpha filter, go ahead, if you still have this sheet of paper, go ahead and look and see what this timestamp is. And if it has the same timestamp as mine does, then maybe we're not testing each filter. Maybe we're just testing one filter out of a production run. I don't know. But I would be curious if you can go back and check your filter data sheet for the H-Alpha filter, and just let me know what this timestamp is in the comments. To all outward appearances, it appears that Antlia is actually testing each filter and providing you with a confirmation that in fact the full width at half maximum for, in this case, the H-Alpha filter is in fact the 3nm bandwidth, and it's centered over the bandwidth of where the hydrogen alpha actually lives. When you're installing this, you want to be careful with these unmounted filters to make sure these beveled sides are facing the adjacent slots in the filter wheel, and that this curved side is facing out towards the outer perimeter of the filter wheel. When I first put one of these in, I did it without paying any attention to that, and sure enough, I had the curved edge here lining up on and interfering with one of these beveled edges of the adjacent filter, so I had to reinstall it. So make sure you check that when you're installing the filter. Also, wear gloves when you're installing these filters so you don't smudge them up right at the beginning. And finally, you can see here I've got all these little tiny screws in one of these empty filter cases, and it's very handy. Now, one of the issues that comes up in installing filters is which way do they go? Is it this way or that way? We have two choices, right? And I know it's been said that there's a one side is more reflective than the other, and you put the more reflective side toward the front of the telescope, the less reflective side facing back towards the camera. Well, I thought I could tell that there was a reflective side, a more reflective side with the RGB filters, but I had no clue for the other filters what that was. I don't even know if there is. It's possible to tell. It seems quite difficult. There is nothing in the documentation that says to do it that way. And after I was done, I sent off an email to Antlia support asking them and letting them know what filters I had bought, and it doesn't matter which way they're facing, and if so, how do I determine that, because I couldn't tell the difference. Surprisingly, they wrote back quite quickly. I know we have a language barrier heading both ways here, but my interpretation of this is that there is no preferred direction for the filters, but they seem to be suggesting that it's not important, and certainly there is no info on that data sheet that they provide. There's no info on their website about orientation of the filters, and of course Antlia support here seems to corroborate that. Okay, let's go over to PixInsight and let me show you the results of my initial imaging tests and how the flats are working with these filters and with my now binning at 2x2 instead of 1x1. So I did a number of exposure tests with the focal reducer installed and binning at 2x2 instead of 1x1 just to figure out what my exposure settings should be. The trend shows that I'm going to be taking shorter exposures now. This is a blue filter, and you can see I've got some vignetting going around, a single exposure. I've got M82 here in the center, and then I did some flats. Now the flats I have darks from a dark set that I had been using that is 1x1, bend at 1x1. I've got dark flats, bend at 1x1, and when I took the flats for this imaging system, I took the flats at 1x1 and then reduced the final calibrated flat and the dark frame from 1x1. I reduced those down to 2x2 using the integer resample function here in PixInsight, and the defaults are already set to do this. A resample factor of 2. We're downsampling. You want to have this set to average as it is for default, and then you can just drag and drop this onto the image and it will convert it down from a 1x1 bin to a 2x2 bin. And here's the corresponding image with the flat applied, and as you can see, it did a very good job. All the vignetting is gone. We have a very flat field around here. This brightness in the center is reduced, and you see the galaxy quite clearly, even though this is the blue filter. Did the same thing with the luminance filter. Again, we get the same kind of vignetting around, but the flat takes all of that out, and it looks quite good. And with the HA, now it's a long enough exposure, so I'm seeing some of the amp glow from the ASI 1600 in the corners here and along the edge. But you can certainly see with this HA filter, you can see the starburst section here in the middle of the galaxy, which is what this galaxy is famous for. And then applying the darks and flats to this image, you can see that the darks did a very good job, even though it's an old set of dark, very old set of darks that I have. I just downsampled them to a 2x2 bin, and they quite effectively took care of this amp glow over here. And here I don't see, of course, any of the vignetting I was seeing with the broader band filters, but yeah, the flats seem to work out quite well. So I did replace the EQ6-R Pro saddle. Went ahead and replaced that with the ADM saddle. It's very well machined. The knobs are larger, so that's nice on the hands, but it is a very well made, precisely made piece of equipment, and I think the price for that level of precision is actually pretty fair. I did do the simple deck and RA axis adjustments that Explorer Lawrence Sher showed in his YouTube video. They're notionally very easy to do. I did find making the RA adjustment was something I had to go back 3 or 4 times to get it right, and finally ended up using channel lock pliers to get that darn thing off. Certainly I've seen a benefit in the deck backlash, and I know I'm going to see a benefit with the precision with which I'll be able to balance the RA axis. I did swap out the ZWO filters for what I hope are a better set from Antlia, the V series LRGB filters, and the 3 nanometer Pro SHO filters. Now the ZWO SHO filters are 7 nanometers, so right away we're getting a little more precision, focusing on that bandwidth that we're after. And then finally, based on some image analysis that I did with all 4 of my scopes, but in particular the Celestron C925, I decided to make some changes to make the pixel scale commensurate with the actual full width at half maximum that I'm getting from my seeing infested skies here. And so I decided to install the focal reducer and to run my ASI 1600 in bin 2x2 mode. And now all I need is some decent weather. I've had a March and April, I tell you, that's been crazy. Let's just hope May is better, and I'll do some imaging and get back to you on some of these mods and how they're actually working. For now, let me leave you with a picture back in the days when I was actually able to do some imaging. This is the Lobster Claw Nebula. I took that with my Explorer Scientific 700mm focal length telescope, and it was with the ZWO filters and the ASI 1600. For now, I'm just looking for some clear skies. Thanks a lot for hanging around, and I'll talk to you later. See ya.